Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to Texas World Language Radio. This is episode 3. I'm your host, James Ayers, and joining me on this venture is our fabulous co-host, Dr. Meredith Clark, our Region 10 Master Consultant, and our voice of reason on the show. Dr. Clark, how are you doing today?
Okay, how are you doing, James?
I'm doing great.
Great.
This has been such a fun experience to come to you guys and talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the world language classroom. Our first 2 episodes, for recap, we talked a little bit about communication. Our last episode, we talked about proficiency. Now we're going to take a deep dive into the TEKS and talk a little bit about the modes of communication. So I'm really excited. If you remember back, we gave you the definition of communication, the expression, interpretation, negotiation of meaning and context with purpose. Mm-hmm. And then last episode, we talked about proficiency being a learner's ability to communicate in the real world. So in all different settings, how well you're able to do that. Now we're going to break it down. And so if we take a look at the TEKS here, the way that things are organized is that right off the bat, they tell us that communication is the overarching outcome of what we're trying to do in our class. From there, they go through and give us some background on that. But then at some point, we break down into 3 different strands, and we could consider those the 3 modes of communication. Mm-hmm. So we have interpersonal mode, interpretive mode, and presentational mode. Today we're going to focus on one of those strands, one of those modes of communication, the interpersonal mode.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. So interpersonal communication is a 2-way street, meaning that one person expresses, the other person has to interpret, okay? And they're going to ask a follow-up question or maybe react, like, oh, how interesting, right? These kinds of things, right? So it's really like a tennis match, okay? So it's really a volley of expressing and exchanging opinions or asking and telling others what they should do, making recommendations. It's always a 2-way street, okay? It can be oral, which we think about having a regular out loud conversation, okay? Or it would be signed conversation in American Sign Language. And then the TEKS also say that interpersonal communication can be written. And what does that mean, okay?
Well, sure. I mean, look at the last 3-4 decades and where we've come as far as communication via computers.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, how much do you text today now?
Yeah, texting is a great example of written communication that is interpersonal, right? You text a message, the other person reads and understands it.
Let's not talk about accuracy with texting.
Right, so. I know, right? I love it. Okay, great. So that's interpersonal communication in a nutshell. And I want to jump into change in thinking here.
Okay.
And teachers, this is a big challenge, okay? So I'm going to say that speaking practice is not necessarily interpersonal communication. Okay, here's some examples. So in our previous episode, we said, turn and tell your partner what you look like.
Oh boy.
Yep.
When have you ever done that in the real world?
First of all, we know there's no purpose. There's no real communicative purpose. There's no context. Like, when do you actually do that? You don't do that, right? Okay. You might describe, like, oh, tell me about your family. Do you look like your mother? You know?
Sure.
That might be a real reason to talk about people's physical characteristics, okay? But when we've had our traditional textbook kind of training our brain, it's like, oh, we must present all of the vocabulary for physical descriptions. Okay, that's weird. Now I have to force the kids to say those words out loud. So turn and tell your partner what you look like. Okay? That is not interpersonal communication. I can look at James and say, short hair, blue eyes,
Are you talking about me?
No, I'm talking about myself, because that's what the teacher told me to do, right?
Okay.
Hey, so if the kids ask you, like, why are we doing this? And your answer is because I told you to, or because you have to practice the language, right?
Yeah.
Not the right response. Here's an interpersonal conversation, okay? James, how are you doing today?
Doing okay. How about you?
Okay. Hey, tell me about your family.
Well, I've got a wife and I've got 5 boys.
Oh, Oh, five boys.
So it's a struggle sometimes.
Do they look like you or do they look like your wife?
Depends on the boys. Some of them kind of look like me, and some of them look like my
Uh-huh.
wife. Some are just out there.
Are they both? Are they all blonde?
They all had blonde hair at one point. The older ones, they're starting to have darker hair.
Okay, all right. Any fantastical colors?
Of hair?
Yeah.
Unless my wife colors their hair, well, she's a hairstylist,
Okay.
so they might. Sometimes they do.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So that was an example of a real conversation, right?
Yeah, and let me point out, like, again, just analyzing this as we're going through it, I like what you said about a tennis match. And have you ever watched a tennis match where they just hit the ball right back to each other and it's just back, like right to each other?
Right.
No, it's all over the place.
Right.
And they're moving up to the net, not to get too deep into the semantics of tennis. But the conversation, that's a pretty good analogy because the
Yeah.
conversation, I didn't know where you were going with all that.
He had no idea.
And so that's real life conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Now we stayed within a topic or a theme, right? And we might have moved on to a different one at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But within that, my brain knows that you're only going to ask me, there's only a combination of questions that you can ask. There's a lot,
Right.
and there's probably an infinite number of combinations, but it's fluid and it's abstract and we can go any direction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I might have asked you questions based on the things you asked me at some
Mm-hmm.
point. You know, we might have got into a conversation on hair color at some point based on where that
Mm-hmm.
conversation was going. So it is interpersonal, can kind of go anywhere.
Right.
Which the reason I'm bringing that up too is it can be stressful for kids.
Yeah.
I mean, think of the cognitive load of having a conversation in another language.
You don't know what
Mm-hmm.
the other person is going to ask you, right? I mean, and unless you're the one who's always asking the questions, which some students do, by the way,
Yes.
I know my ESL students do. If you're the person who's always asking the questions, then you're kind of controlling, right, the language to a certain degree. It's a lot scarier to be on the receiving end of that volley, right? You don't know where the ball is going to go. You're not exactly sure what question they might throw at you next, which is why the beautiful part about conversation is you can jump in and ask questions too. We can react. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
You have 5 boys. Wow, right? Like these are all normal parts of that beautiful volley, question and volley with reactions, okay? Follow-up questions. This is something else I work with my ESL students on. Okay, she just told you that her parents are from Nicaragua. What's the follow-up question? And they have to think, follow-up question. And I'm like, a question about what she just told you, right?
Yeah.
And so like teaching kids the art of conversation is really what we're trying to teach them with interpersonal.
And bottom line is that it's not scripted.
Right, it's not scripted. It's not scripted.
Yeah.
Parts of it can be rehearsed. They can rehearse how to react. Oh, that's cool. Que interesante, right? But it's not a script. It's not a script. So if we're changing our thinking from it's not just speaking practice, which has no context and no purpose, okay, and maybe no interpretation and maybe no negotiation of meaning.
Yeah.
And we're teaching kids to have a real conversation. We're changing our thinking. And then as a teacher, I want to ask myself, how do I teach kids to have a conversation? And what is the obvious answer? To ask kids to do the TEKS.
Sure.
Right? And so if we look at these student expectations, we're going to see that every single one, A, B, C, all the way down through F, asks students to do a language function, okay? So the first one is to ask and respond to questions about everyday life using memorized words and phrases, okay? So we kind of just demonstrated that, asking about the family. The second one is to express and exchange personal opinions, okay? Here's what that sounds like. It's not tell your partner what your favorite band is. Metallica, you go.
Metallica is my favorite band, so
Oh,
you stole
wow.
my answer.
All right. Okay, here's what that sounds like, okay? It's not speaking practice, it's James, what's your favorite band?
Oh, Metallica's my favorite band. What about you?
Really?
Oh, okay. What's your favorite band?
The Beatles.
The Beatles.
I
They're-
love the Beatles.
Oh gosh, here we go.
And BTS. Tiny Hearts. Okay, all right. That's a real conversation.
Yes.
It's not just tell, right? Okay, you'll notice the TEKS for interpersonal never say tell. Okay? If we look at C, asking others what they need to do or should do, okay, here's what that sounds like in real life. Oh man, I have a big math test on Friday.
Okay. Have you studied for it?
No, I'm really nervous.
You better schedule some time to study. Like, maybe call up a friend and get with them. I'm not helping you with this.
Okay.
I don't know anything about math, but
Okay, good. So he's telling me what I should do here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and it's in a real context. I have a test, I'm nervous, I'm not ready. He's trying to help me out. That's what that sounds like.
well, and as you notice too, again, you can go through these examples all day, and there's things you can pull out. And what does this look like at the novice level, right? If you said, hey, I have a math test, what should I do? And these might be words and phrases that you've memorized and that we're using in different contexts. That's great. Those are good questions. What should I do? You can ask that in a variety of different contexts. Very appropriate. And my response might have been even more simple. You should study.
Yeah.
Right?
Or study more, right?
But-
Novice mid.
I really like also here, and I'm gonna pull this in a bit too, is if you notice these conversations, there's reactions, we laugh, there's body gestures and movement. Those are all part of our real world conversations.
Yep.
We react different ways, and sometimes those are our communication. And say, whatever.
Metallica.
Yeah, exactly. And so that brings a message, and then I react in a different way. Teaching kids to react to and do those things is part of the conversation. That brings that real world element to that, right? To just sit there and say, what band do you like? The Beatles.
I like the Beatles.
Me, I'm not even caring at this point because I'm just going down my script. That's not a lot of purpose behind the communication.
And so we hear teachers say, oh, the kids aren't motivated, they're not engaged. And then I go into classrooms and I see kids doing just speaking practice that's heavily scripted. I have partner A, I'm Miguel, you're Juanita, and I read this part and you write down the part that I said because that is not engaging. Nobody talks like that in the real world, but the second we ask kids to authentically ask and answer questions about things that are actually happening in their real life that are relevant, you'll see the smiles.
And it
You'll
has
see the
nothing to
laughter.
do with the question itself or the language. Those are great questions.
Yeah.
Those are great reactions. But how easy would it be to come into a class and say, hey guys, today we're going to figure out if our class likes hip hop more or rock and roll.
I'm in.
And so, we would use the same question. So now I need you to go interview 4 or 5 people in your class, or you're going to interview X amount of people in your class. You're going to ask them these questions. We might even give them the questions, right?
Yeah.
Hey, what's your favorite band? And again, it's maybe a one word, the Beatles. Okay, Meredith, the Beatles. Maybe if I'm in a level 2 class, I might follow that up. Why? Why do you like the Beatles? Oh, my mom's favorite song was Let It Be. I don't know, Beatles
Let It Be,
songs.
that's a
Okay,
good
great.
one, James.
And then
Yeah.
and then you're following up. And now we're gathering that data and we're going to use it for something in the class.
And we're
now there's
learning.
purpose behind that.
Yeah.
Again, you're repeating questions, but how different is that from just saying, hey, partner up with somebody and ask them what their favorite band is. Hey, what's your favorite band? Okay, my favorite band's Metallica. Great. And then we're back into English and we're talking about what we did this weekend because we've completed whatever that activity was.
Yeah, and we're on our cell phones.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't want that to happen.
I've never seen students on their cell phone.
Oh,
I'm just
my
kidding.
goodness.
Big problem.
Yeah. Okay. So we've given some good examples here of student expectation A, B, and C. D is one that is a little tricky sometimes. It's not easily apparent what this is talking about. So let's dig into it. D says students will articulate requests, offer alternatives, or develop simple plans. Now, developing plans, most people are like, oh yeah, I get that, okay? But here is articulating a request and offering an alternative, okay? So, James, I'm gonna go see a movie this weekend. Would you like to come with me to the movie theater?
What movie are you thinking of seeing?
I think that I'm going to see, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it.
Well, I'd be interested in seeing Mean Girls. I've already seen Oppenheimer.
Oh, Mean Girls.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's okay.
Okay.
How about 7 o'clock?
On Saturday?
Yeah.
Can we do Friday instead?
Oh, Friday. let me check my calendar. Yeah, Friday will work.
Okay,
Yeah.
same time?
Yeah, 7.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, great. So that was a real world example of how people articulate a request or offer alternatives, right? I asked him if he wanted to go to the movies. He didn't want to on Saturday. He didn't tell me why. Okay, I didn't press him. But he offered an alternative, which was Friday, and we were able to develop the simple plan. Okay, so hopefully that example helps clear up just a little bit. It's like offering alternatives. What does that even mean? It's basically saying, no, I can't, but how about another time, another place, etc. Okay? All right. E and F, I like to call these, like these are little student expectations that layer on top of the other student expectations because they both say participate. E says in spoken conversation using culturally appropriate expressions, register, and gestures. And F says the same thing, except F is about written communication, which we would think of texting, okay? So anytime kids are doing A, B, C, or D, they need to use culturally appropriate expressions, register, and gestures. For example, it is not polite to point with your finger in certain countries, or if you were communicating with your peers, you would want to use that level of register or formality, okay? So E and F really are, I see them as student expectations that can accompany A, B, C, and D. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think you could probably, you know, you lived in Chile for a while, I lived in Uruguay. There's probably tons of examples of how you communicated there that you noticed right off the bat that was different from how we communicated here.
Culturally.
I can't think of any written off the top of my head.
Right.
I think texting, there's probably some.
Yeah.
But I think we teach these the same way that we teach that negotiation of meaning. You know, you have things you can put on the board to help students remember that. Like, hey, when you greet somebody, do this.
Yep.
It doesn't, certainly we're not getting into inappropriate things, but you know, when you greet somebody, you do it with a handshake or you do it certain ways. And so for kids to understand that, now they're starting to communicate in a way that's culturally appropriate.
Right. And also when we talk about spelling, not spelling, but telling somebody your phone number. Okay, here's a great example of intercultural communication. In the United States, we do the 3 area code, then the 3 numbers, and then a lot of times we'll say either 1, 2, 3, 4, or sometimes people will say 12, 34, right? In certain countries it could be different. So the way you tell your height is different. Units of measurement, these types of things all fall into using culturally appropriate expressions, register, and gestures. When you're receiving a gift, you receive with 2 hands in Korea, right? So all of these things are things that make up elements of the conversation that we typically didn't used to teach too much, right?
Yeah.
But now we can. Okay, so let's dig in here and go old strategy versus new strategy, okay? So the old strategy was assuming that for interpersonal communication, students had to memorize the vocabulary first and practice the grammar second. And then magically V plus G equals C communication. And that is not how it works. The new strategy is to teach vocabulary, grammar, and communication by asking kids to do the student expectations in the TEKS all at the same time, okay? Now, you might be asking me, okay, how do you do that? How do you not teach them the vocabulary first and then the grammar? Well, there are certain techniques, and they're called high leverage teaching practices. And the very first one that a lot of you have probably heard about is called facilitating target language comprehension. So I model asking and responding to questions in the target language, and I support what I'm saying with visuals and gestures, and I engage the students in another practice that we would call discourse community. If you'd like more information about these teaching practices, you can look them up in the 2 volumes by Eileen Glitson and Rick Donato, okay? Published by ACTFL. We also, while we're modeling in the target language, we want to make sure that we're checking for student understanding. If the students aren't understanding, they're negotiating the meaning, just like earlier when James said older, younger, right? We want to make sure that kids are understanding us. And then when we ask students for output, meaning interpersonal, express and exchange a personal opinion, we scaffold that output for them. So I'm not just going to model it, I like Beatles, you like Metallica, now you do it. No, I'm going to have some sentence stems on the board. I'm going to let kids kind of practice it by themselves, just play with the language a little bit, okay, figure it out. And then I'm going to model it again, check and make sure that they're following me, and then I would have them do the student expectation on their own. Obviously, by the end of the week, we're removing some of these scaffolds, this structure, language, sentence stems that are on my board, and maybe some vocabulary, okay?
And think how much pressure that takes off the student, too.
Yeah.
If you have something on the board there that is helping you communicate, whether it's a phrase or a sentence starter or even a word wall of vocabulary that's relevant to what you're talking about, that will not only prop up your proficiency, but it really takes a lot of anxiety away.
It does.
And so that allows, you want the students to be successful, right? And we want to push for them to get to these higher levels of proficiency. We have to support it on some level.
Right.
It doesn't magically happen.
Right. So that output is very scaffolded. And as you go through your unit, you can start removing some of those scaffolds. And obviously, if students have an IEP or a 504, you would want a scaffold for them as well, for as long as they need it. Students, again, how do we teach communication, right? Students are going to perform the student expectations in the TEKS, and they're going to do something with that information, right? It's not just, why are we doing this? Because the teacher told me to. No, it's, I'm doing this to learn what his favorite band is, so I can say that my band is better.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you haven't figured this out by now, again, this is all tying into communication. There's expression, negotiation, expression, interpretation, negotiation of meaning if necessary. But we have a purpose behind this. I mean, we're in the classroom, we have a context, but we got to stop doing things that don't have purpose in the classroom. Turn and talk to your partner is not a bad strategy, but without a purpose, it's not engaging for one.
Right.
And then
It's
the
not
students
communication.
that are getting something out of it are the ones that are very highly motivated, that are intent on doing everything they can. For the rest of people, they're tuning out. And I'm not saying that just because we have a purpose, that's a magic pill for engagement. It might not be. There's some students that just don't want to do it, or they don't care on some days. That's okay. As a teacher, you have to figure out how to make things more engaging. That's a constant battle. But you have to start having purpose in what we're doing. Look at the TEKS and look at those student expectations that we find when it comes to interpersonal communication, asking, responding, articulating requests. Going down that list there, with the exception of the last two, all those verbs are things that we're wanting our students to do. If we can insert a purpose there with that, now our students are communicating.
Right.
And we can support it, and we have to support it too, and find ways to support that to help them be successful. As Dr. Clark mentioned too, as you start to take away those supports, that's where we're really seeing what they can do with the language. That's where we're really starting to see where their proficiency is. The cool thing about communication is that it does go in every direction. With interpersonal communication especially, you have this opportunity to go in an infinite number of directions. And that's what's fun about having conversations with people and communicating with people. Let's not limit our students to just words and phrases that they have to be successful on a test. Let's give them opportunities to communicate. Let's push them into directions that maybe they don't feel comfortable sometimes as far as topics and elaboration. That allows them to grow and to be more proficient in what they're doing.
Good. So, just to sum it up, interpersonal communication is like a tennis match. There's a volley, right? The other person has to understand what one person is saying and respond appropriately. It's not just you say this, I say this, and we're finished. Okay, so that's like, right? We hope you get that out of this episode. Okay, now let's think about what we should stop doing and what we should start doing. So James, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think with when it comes to interpersonal communication, we have to stop the scripted conversations. It's okay to come up with scenarios, or it's okay to come up with what a conversation might look like and present that to students and have them see what that's going to look like and model that for them. It's okay to do that, but I think we need to give them the freedom to communicate in any direction that they want. I mean, we want them to be able, much like an artist, to be able to use anything that's at their disposal, their palette there. And so stop scripting conversations when it comes to that. Find a purpose for your interpersonal communication and allow the students to go off that. You know, to sit there and maybe provide a picture for a student and say, hey, let's talk about this. You and your partner talk about that now. There's a million different directions we could go there and having that conversation. Look at the TEKS and find out what those functions are.
Yeah.
Stick to those.
Yeah, I love that. What should we start doing? Start letting the TEKS for interpersonal, every time you're going to have kids do interpersonal communication, start every single learning objective with one of these TEKS, and it's going to help ensure that your kids actually develop interpersonal communication skills. Okay, all right, so outro. I used to think,
and this kind of going back to the last couple episodes, I used to think that learning language was this formulaic process where you did this and then you did this almost, and I'm sure I told students, it's like a puzzle. You get a piece at a time and you put it together.
Yeah.
Now I don't think that way at all. Language is acquired. We acquire it through communication. It's the only way we acquire it. There has to be input for us to be able to acquire all the properties that go along with that. As we do that, we're able to produce language, and we're able to function in these different modes of communication. We call them strands in the TEKS, but we're able to have conversations. As we do more of that, our proficiency grows, and we're able to do those things at different proficiency levels, at higher proficiency levels.
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool when we think about how our standards really help students develop communication and proficiency. It's absolutely amazing. And so, we hope that you've learned a lot in this episode, and next time we hope that you tune in, because we will be diving into the topic of interpretive communication and what the TEKS are asking students to do in that mode. And we hope that you share this podcast with your colleagues, and again, just want to end with, together, world language teachers, if we work together and teach the TEKS, we have the most influence, more influence than any other person about whether our students acquire another language. And so let's get out there, let's teach kids to do these TEKS, and if we do, they will learn to communicate. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.